Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from the Straight. Today we look forward to the Inglis Classic Sale with our special guest, Sebastian Hutch, the Inglis Bloodstock CEO. We'll also look at a big week in racing with the announcement of a new CEO for the New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing. And the wagering world, Blue Bet bought out Top Sport this week, and we looked at what that means and for the Bet brand going forward. But straight into the story of the week, and Sebastian Hutch, Inglis Bloodstock CEO, fantastic to have us with you. I believe you're a fan of the program, so it's nice to be able to bring you on board.
I'm flattered to be referred to as the story of the week. I never thought I'd achieve such a lofty position so quickly. So no, I enjoy that. I enjoy I'm a listener rather than a viewer, but you're listening.
You probably see enough for us during the year that you don't probably need to look at it, Sebastian. But anyway, interesting time of year. I guess it's the first yearling sale of the season for Inglis stepping into this week. Starts on Sunday, runs Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I mean, what have you made of the market so far this year, Sebastian? And I guess how does that affect the way you guys, assess what success looks like, over the next week?
I mean, we obviously had the benefit of observing the markets on the Gold Coast and New Zealand in January and a couple of weeks ago in New Zealand. To all intents and purposes, I don't think a lot has happened that is any great surprise to people who are involved in the industry professionally. I think there was an expectation that things would get a little bit tougher. People have to work harder to sell horses, and certainly it feels like it's played out that way. I mean, there are always some surprises in terms of how certain people go about their business, but on the whole, I think it's been as expected within reason. In terms of how it affects how we prepare for the sale, it really doesn't make any difference because, ultimately, we try and prepare for every sale as if it's almost like an Armageddon type situation. Anyway, you want to approach the sale and feel like you've left no stone unturned in preparation for the sale. Ultimately, we have a mandate to try and achieve the best result we possibly can for a vendor. And we feel like we have a process in place that helps us to achieve that. And to all intents and purposes, we've been preparing for the sales the same way for a number of years. And this sale is no different. We feel it's worked well for us, and we feel like we're in a good spot in terms of preparation for the sale at this juncture. And really, we want vendors to be able to walk away from the sale and say, well, Inglis did all they could in terms of what they can do to try and help us achieve the best result. And we can walk away feeling like we've fisted and say the best market that we possibly can.
Justin, I think it's fair to say, certainly in your time and probably preceding your appointment at Inglis, that the way the Inglis Classic Sales evolved from where it was to where it is now. Can you sort of take us through how this sale has perhaps changed?
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous respect for the sale amongst participants now. It maybe wasn't the case 6-8 years ago. Prior to me coming to work at Inglis, there was certainly a mandate amongst management at Inglis to try and raise the profile of the sale. I think my last year at Coolmore was 2018, and that was the year they ran that first classic sale at Riverside. The results were extraordinary. They turned over 55 odd million. It was incredible. And I think that was, the sale had been an upward trajectory from there. But I think that really brought it to a new level. And we've had, we had a couple of tricky years, my first couple of years here as regards the sale, but really it's consistently produced a better profile of racehorse, which I think is in turn given buyers more confident, which in turn prompted vendors to be more confident in the profile of horse that they can offer here. And it's really quite a significant sale in the context of the Australasian Bloodstock calendar now.
And within that, Sebastian, sort of how the demographics changed for the buyers? I mean, you talk about the high quality of graduate coming out of the sale. And probably historically it's been a trainer/syndicator sale that sort of, allowed people to buy in at, maybe not at their premium levels, but, get horses that are, good horses to be able to, work through the stables. I mean, how has that demographic changed, do you feel?
Look, honestly, I would say it hasn't changed dramatically. Like fundamentally, the sale is still a sale that services necessity in the market. Trainer, indicator, traders, people who ultimately need to be buying and trading stock. But what has happened is that the profile of the sale being synonymous with more and more good horses encouraged more people who might not ordinarily have participated in the sale. People who might be more inclined to invest at the top end. So Italian syndicate will take this sale seriously. They might not necessarily find a horse to suit them, but noting the fact that horses like I'm Invincible, Choisir, Extreme Choice, Castelvecchio, Hellbent, Brazen Bow, etc. have come out of the sale, there's just an inclination on the part of those people to say, look, this is a sale we need to take seriously. I mean, Henry Field tells a great story about buying Cosmic Force here. You know, he just talks about the day he saw him and just thought he was the most spectacular animal. Bought him, won a Pago, horse's favourite for the slipper. And now he's a very effective young stallion having graduated from the Classic Sale. You know, the sale didn't have that level of respect in the past. It has it now. And I think that's important. That we don't need to work hard to sell the sale to people. The sale sells itself in many respects. But at the same time, it hasn't drifted away from its traditions of being a sale that people can approach with confidence, knowing that there'll be value to be found. Like, it hasn't become an exclusive sale by any stretch of the imagination.
We've spoken about this previously, Sebastian, but I'm sure some vendors that maybe don't meet their expectations, you know, next week or over the next week, that they say, where was the country trainers and things like that? Where's such and such a buyer? The sales company's got a great handle on who's participating in the market better than anyone. What would you say to that? Or are the country trainers coming? Will there be a selection there?
You'll never meet a person, Tim, who works for an auction house who says we've got enough buyers for a sale. Like, we don't. There's no exhaustive number. We want to try and, like, you always want to try and find one more buyer. So, you know, the profile of people who buy yearlings is fundamentally the same year on year. People who participate in that bottom quarter, that bottom third, have more access to stock than what they've ever had before. To change the nature of who participates there a little bit. You know, some of those country trainers will still buy yearling because they want to rate 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds and target that early prize money that you can target if you buy, say, a trial horse, for example. But what we found have become a more and more prominent feature of the sale, like Classic, are the traders. You know, people who want to buy horses to put back to ready to race sales later in the year. People who want to buy horses to trial and trade, whether it's to Hong Kong, whether it's domestically, like with a strong representation year from New Zealand and from Hong Kong, Malaysia, some of the other Southeast Asian countries, people looking for horses that are either candidates to go and race in those jurisdictions or to develop in New Zealand, trade out in New Zealand, trade out in Australia. It's become a really important part of the market, Classic, and I think that's filled a void that might have been left by some of the country trainers.
Is there a balance? And you talk about the English sort of main yearling sales and how the sort of, I guess, the next couple of months evolves between, you know, Classic through to Premier and then in Melbourne and then on back to Easter again. Do you feel like the balance is right where the market's at the moment? I'm sure you have to tweak it a little bit to adjust where the market is and the type of horse you got or whatever. But in terms of what horses go where, and that the three sales do have that sense of having a distinct identity, Sebastian?
Yeah, I feel like it flows quite naturally. You know, we're constantly reevaluating the structure of the sales, and you know, we have a lot of discussions with people over the year or over the course of the year, annually, about the structure of the sales. You know, we're running a business. We're trying to run an effective business, and to make significant changes to the structure, you need to be confident that those changes will be capable of generating, you know, better return for the business and a better result for our stakeholders, who are primarily the vendors. You need to be absolutely confident that you're going to do that. And we're not really in an environment where you can just trial it for a year. It's like, from our point of view, it's a hugely competitive market. You know, to go and trial something for a year, we risk giving up market share to a competitor that we've worked hard to earn and worked hard to retain. So, like, changes for the sake of change's sake is something that we're not necessarily going to want to entertain at this stage. Probably what does make putting the sales together more challenging in varying different years is just, you know, very simply the profile of stallions in the market. You know, in any given year, you know, stallion strength is a huge driver of the popularity of yearlings and the strength of the yearling market. So there are years where you have a cluster of proven stallions and a strong group of proven stallions, and in other years it's more speculative, where you have a group of young horses coming through looking to establish themselves as the next group of proven horses. Certainly this year there's a huge volume of young stallions with stock in the market. I think that's exciting for them, because the market excited about the idea of buying the first yearlings by Home Affairs or Stay Inside or Pinatubo or St. Mark's Basilica, a whole range of different horses. And I think people see opportunities in buying the progeny of stallions that have first crop 2-year-olds or first crop 3-year-olds. There's a potential for some arbitrage there for people. They might have offspring at home that they haven't exposed to the races yet, that they think can go and be good horses. And when they are good horses, that the value of those stallions will grow exponentially. So I think people try and exploit the value that those stallions can represent. And I suppose from our point of view, we're looking forward to seeing who that next clump of young horses are that'll go on and be champion stallion in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years time, because we are at a stage where the perennial champion stallions, whether it's Snitzel, I'm Invincible, are getting into the twilight of their career, so it'll be interesting to see who Rosenfield can avoid. I mean, you got fattening conversations about, of course, Wooden Bassett, Oleg Karn, and these different stallions and where these horses are going to be in 5 years' time. It's exciting to think that we have young stallions coming through that can be champion stallions in the future.
What are you expecting when selling gets underway on Sunday?
What am I expecting? Tim Rowe is throwing curveballs. Thanks to him. Really appreciate that. I'm expecting primarily to be a buyer's market. Our observations of sale at the Gold Coast and New Zealand was that while there was good interest, or appeared to be good interest across the board, people were conservative with their approach to bidding. And while this sale is at a different price point to those sales, I expect something similar to materialize here. There are a lot of people who haven't shopped or shopped hard to this point of the year, who see this sale that they're going to target, particularly syndicators, trainers. I think there's appeal to those people in shopping in that 50 to 150 bracket. And we have what we feel are plenty nice horses on the grounds, presented by good vendors who have a reputation for presenting nice horses. So I think the horses that jump through the hoops, that's been the case. The early sales will sell well. And some of those horses that might have some blemishes against their pedigree or their vetting or their physique, we'll have to work a bit harder to try and marry them with a buyer.
Sebastian, we've seen the sort of evolution of the English race series over recent years, and obviously the English Millennium is a key part of that. It's built up. It's probably been 4 or 5 years since you sort of built that up as a major prize money feature race in terms of where that sits. I mean, how have you seen the development of that race? And I guess as a source of good horses, I suppose.
Yeah, it's an important part of our race series. Like, we invest a lot of money into it. We want to try and create a situation whereby we're providing people who invest in stock at our sales with the opportunity to earn a significant return. So coupling high prize money races like the Millennium, the English Sprint at Flemington, the Nursery and the Banner, which are 2 well-established 2-year-old races pre-Christmas, coupling that group of races with the English Extra bonus has been a big step for us. I don't want to way away from just having a conversation about the Millennium, but the Extra bonus has been something of a revelation to this point. I don't think we're halfway through the series or the races that are scheduled for the series. And we've had 22 individual trainers win bonuses. No trainer has won more than one bonus, which is fantastic. So look, we have this massive pool of owners, hundreds of owners who won their share of $100,000 bonus for winning a maiden. I think when you come to a sale like Classic or Premier later on, and you're someone who's looking to try and invest in stock, and you ask yourself, well, can I win a maiden with this horse? And if you can program your horse to go and win a 3-year-old maiden, primarily in New South Wales or Victoria, and pick a $100,000 bonus to go with it, the feedback has been fantastic. I think it's the kind of thing that gives trainers, syndicators, people who are looking to try and find clients to buy into horses, an added string to their bow in terms of incentivizing that. It's a massive, very massive appeal to me if I knew that I bought a share in a horse, that horse, the candidate maiden, spring 3-year-old, and I could win 120 grand. I think Tony Otterbury said it great. He won a maiden with a horse with Charlotte Littlefield and Julian Hay the other night, and he got more money than what he would have won for winning a group race. It's just a no-brainer. You look through the profile of people who've won bonuses so far, you think this is achieving our objective of seeing more people win more prize money more often, and hopefully that will continue to be the case.
Sebastian, we've had tributes afloat after the death of the Aga Khan this week, one of the biggest players in racing and breeding the world over the last 40 to 50 years. You're a global man of the bloodstock world. You understand the impact of his mates. I mean, how would you measure the impacts that the Aga Khan was able to make within not just the European bloodstock sector, but all over the world?
hugely significant on a variety of different levels. I mean, he's obviously, and first of all, I think everybody wants to celebrate his contribution to racing and breeding across Europe and fundamentally the world. I mean, interesting to hear John Massara talk about, and you have to look at the role that an Aga Khan cultivated pedigree had in developing what's one of the best youth settings in the country in the autumn sun. So the significance of his breeding expertise is felt not just in Europe, but right around the world. He's been a huge employer or indirect employer of a lot of people, whether through stud farms in Ireland and France. He's obviously had huge volumes of horses in training in various stages across Ireland, France, and the UK. But correct me if I'm wrong, but he's a major shareholder in GA. I think he's a major shareholder in Arcana. And I can't say to this point that I've read how that's going to play out in terms of how his equity in those businesses are managed. But it's an important thing to consider for the industries up there. Yeah, in a way, you try and look it through the prism of Australian racing, for example. We have some major investors in Australian racing, where Sheikh Mohammed through Godolphin, Magner families through Coolmore, Mr. Zhang with Yulong. But more typically, our market is better diversified. We have huge volumes of people involved or invested in at a certain level, but we're not necessarily reliant on one individual or another. And I think that's a healthy thing. Those people who are prepared to go and invest in sport, whether it's racing or breeding, the way that someone like the Aga Khan had, very difficult to try and find with people. He did that loss to the sport, and I think people reflect very fondly on his contribution. And at the same time, we look at it and say we'd have love to have had more participants here, but we're probably lucky that we're so well diversified in terms of how people participate.
Tim, you had a chat to a few industry people yesterday after the news broke about the Aga Khan's death. I mean, what was the sort of reflection that they thought about it, both globally but also within Australia?
I spoke to John Massara, as Sebastian touched on. They bred in partnership with the Aga Khan, the Autumn Sun, and sold him, I think it was 700,000 at Easter, and then paid a lot more to buy him back at Arrowfield. But that was a commercial venture, which was probably different to the way the Aga Khan operated in Europe. He bred to race. Yes, he's got a uni at stud and a lot of good stallions at stud, but primarily he was an owner breeder, and that's doesn't tend to happen in Australia very much. We're in a seller's market, and people sell their best stock at Magic Millions, Easter, and obviously Classic and Premier and so forth. So John thought he had the pleasure of sort of sharing a box with him at Shanti, and really enjoyed his company. And then, interestingly enough, I spoke to Johnny McKeever, who's out here at the moment and doing inspections at Classic Sale. He actually grew up on one of the Aga Khan's studs in Ireland when his father rented a house on the stud. So he grew up there for the first 15 or 20 years of his life, which was interesting. But from his bloodstock perspective, he said you can't get enough of the Aga Khan bloodlines. They just seem to keep reproducing even outside the star mares or the big performers. If you buy into those families, you're a better chance than average of producing a good horse. And he's encouraged Australian clients to try and target that. And whether more of those will come onto the market now since his death, it'll be interesting to know. But his daughter, Zara, I believe, is very passionate about the industry as well. So there's some hope that it'll continue on, whether to the same scale is another question. And his interests, as Sebastian said, in Goffs and Arcana, things like that will have to be sorted out. But there is some family interest there, unlike, say, some of the other big players that maybe there's not a succession plan there.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a generational change in world, bloodstock and breeding over the pace of the past few years. Obviously we've seen Sheikh Hamdan's passing. There's been a host of others sort of, those bigger families, the bigger operations, either moving on or downsizing or whatever else. So, interesting time in the global bloodstock scene, but there's still plenty of new investment. Sebastian, you spent a fair bit of your time trying to, encourage those global investors to get involved in the Australian market, but also we've seen some of those global investors very much, base themselves, whether it's Mr. Zhang through yearling or whatever else it is, that obviously John Stewart over the last 12 months been well publicised. I said generationally there seems to be a change in the GAR, but there does seem plenty of people ready to take the step up. Yep.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we talk about it a lot. I mean, I think there can be too much of an obsession, certainly in terms of our market, with new people. Like I always felt like if we worked more effectively to service existing people and people who've gone and made the effort to get involved, I feel like we put ourselves in an advantageous position. There are always new people filtering through. I mean, a sale never goes by with a new name on the sheet. And it's the same internationally. I mean, you look at the nature of the investment made by key interruption partners in Europe over the last few years. It's been, I mean, particularly the last 6 months, it's just been incredible. Even from the point of view of a guy like Mike Rapoli, who typically has been exclusively an investor in stock in the US. He's gone and bought stock in England, Ireland, France, Japan. I mean, jurisdictions, every jurisdiction you can imagine. These are people who I'm sure one day or another will turn their attention to Australia because the product is so appealing. I mean, fascinating meeting about Northern Vistikov and Sunbay. And obviously he had the experience of being a Rowe on Golden Eagle Day and his horse running awfully well in the Golden Eagle. And he talked about Australia being a priority for him going forward. I mean, what that necessarily entails, whether it's the repatriation of tried horses or whether he'll start breeding down here if Charon was to shuttle, etc. The fundamentals of our racing make a lot of sense to people. And as long as that's the case, it's going to continue to make appeal to people to get involved here and incumbent, whether it's the auction houses, trainers, bloodstock agents, whoever it was, to try and create an environment that's suitably appealing. Osborne do a fantastic job in terms of promoting the merit of our industry to people around the world. And, hopefully that's something we can try and take advantage of or continue to take advantage of over any number of years.
Sebastian, thank you so much for your time. Great to have you on board. Best of luck with the sale this week. It's a really interesting time of year. It's to kick off the yearling season. No doubt there's a bit of pre-match nerves amongst the team, but really a sense of building into the new year, a new opportunity. And best of luck with it. And thank you for joining us.
Hopefully I'll get invited back again.
Moving now, Tim, to news in the racing world. And the big news this week, breaking on Wednesday, was that New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing had appointed a new CEO, Matt Ballesty. Been waiting for that decision for probably a few months now. Tim, an interesting one. He comes to the role with considerable background in the casino and hospitality sector. Well, I'll talk a bit more in a minute about, I guess, what his broader challenges are. It's something we've covered off on the straight this week. But Tim, you were over in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago through Karaka, and I mean, what's the vibe and the feeling and the attitude there? Was there a sense that they were wanting something particular out of the CEO appointment?
Well, I did speak to Russell Warwick, who's the NZTR chair, last week, and he said a announcement was soon. I didn't think it was this soon, but obviously they've found their man. Look, I think as the sales results in comparison to previous years, as we've touched on previously, was positive. Everyone's quite positive the way the industry is going, but the way the Entain New Zealand Tab deal is structured, the sugar hits are in the first 5 years, and if they geo block, another 100 million goes in. But it's a lot of the hard work they have to make the first 5 years count, and the first 2 years are already done. So I think it's just interesting appointment that they've got someone from, want a better term, an outsider to take over NZTR, and maybe he will have to make some hard calls that some unpopular decisions.
Yeah, no, he's an interesting one because I think probably we're 2 years into that, almost 2 years into that 5 years now. We're 2 years in sort of May, June this year. So there's not a lot of time for him to sort of get things going on that sort of first 5 years of an Entain deal, and I guess make the changes that feel probably needed to be made. I mean, I listed the 5 priorities in an article which is published this week, and the first one was, as he spoke about, kind of alluded to, the executive refresh. He's probably going to have to go in there and assess the wheat from the chaff pretty quickly at NZTR, work out who the best people are. He'll need some operational knowledge to help him through, especially early in the journey, because as you and I know, and any executive that's walked into a PRA knows, that institutional knowledge is valuable in trying to work out who's who in the zoo and how things are going to work out. But then he's just got to work out strategically where they sit, and they probably need a strategic reset. If you have a look through on the strategic plan put together last year, 2024 to 2028 strategic plan, look, it's arguable the fact it was a fairly brief document. It probably wasn't in depth enough. And if he's going to reformulate that and get a team behind him, he's probably going to have to get a couple of other like-minded people in there to work things out. The other chief political issue around this stuff is venue rationalisation. Never a popular one. you might recall back on the Vassaro report in 2018, venue rationalisation was one of the key points around this stuff. And it's never an easy one to achieve. I think we've gone from 48 to 34 in New Zealand in terms of tracks. They wanted, Vassaro sort of pinpointed 28 as the number. So there's a bit more work to be done there. Again, plan came out last year, the venues plan, which pretty much said, well, we're staying where we are for the next 5 years. A couple might drop off. We'll see what happens. But it wasn't really a clear plan for what they wanted to achieve. And so I think that, Matt Ballesty is going to have a bit of a challenge around there. The other one, in a more broader sense, and supercharge ownership's a key aspect of it. Probably got half the ownership numbers in New Zealand as we have in Australia. So in terms of, representative-wise, I think it's 1 in 191 in Australia and 1 in about 355 in New Zealand. So there's some challenges there. There's problems with the technology platform over there, which we obviously have in Australia too, that the antiquated sort of way of doing things is causing inefficiencies. So that needs to be fixed. But the one thing I wanted to raise with you quickly, Tim, around this stuff, and it's a point I raised at this, and I spoke to a couple of people around this, and they do feel passionately about it. Keeping New Zealand's best horses in New Zealand. Now, New Zealand has been a trading nation for a long time. The trainers in particular have become very adept at trading off horses, making their money and sort of, moving on to the next thing rather than, and often that means Australia. A lot of the time that might mean Hong Kong. So if they've got a promising horse that, they're a nursery, they come out of the nursery and they go somewhere else. From a wagering perspective, from an engagement perspective, surely it's got to be a net positive for New Zealand if they try to keep their best horses in New Zealand longer rather than sort of a lot of them get to their sort of 3-year-old year and find themselves elsewhere.
It's the obvious one. Aussie Curb, I'm a big Aussie Australian owner, bought a lot of horses out of New Zealand off trials, race form, Sierra Sue back a few years, but more recently, I think he only bought one this week as well. So maybe there's the appeal if the prize money goes up with the NZB Kiwi, big rate, cracker millions and so forth that, yes, that some of those Aussie investors will still buy to those horses, but keep them in New Zealand either long-term or certainly longer, for 4-year-old series or go back and forth. We've got some Aussie horses going over to New Zealand for the BCD sprint this weekend. So, and Chris Waller had a winner on Cracker Millions night for, it wasn't a sales horse or anything, just a Group 2, $1 million race. So maybe that sort of, instead of all the Kiwis coming to Australia, or vice versa, and that's got to help turnover. And that's obviously what the TAB and the industry needs to keep funding prize money and investment in the industry.
Yeah, and I think from that perspective, Tim, it's probably not just a prize money issue. It's also a programming issue. Sort of the information I sort of sources about the average horse in New Zealand has about half a start less a year than an average horse in Australia. With that in mind, from a wagering perspective, that's important. But, if that flows through to the better horses, you want to see them more often. So I think there's probably some work to do there. Now, that involves a lot of work with the clubs. I haven't read the article, I haven't looked through, but obviously the clubs are a major part of this. But, Matt Ballesty certainly got plenty to do. He starts a job, I think, on March 5, Tim, and he'll get stuck right into it. All right, we'll move on to the wagering world. We've also had some big news in there this week as well. A really interesting, I wrote an article last week, I think, probably maybe a week too early, someone said, maybe I did, but about how the great rationalisation of the corporate bookmaking Australia sector in Australia hasn't really happened as yet. But we've had a big move this week with BetR/BooBet buying out Top Sport in a $10 million deal. Top Sport have sort of been, for want of a better term, Australia's most eligible bachelor when it comes to being bought out for a while. It's not surprising that they would get bought out. And BetR have been most aggressive suitor. They've been talking about inorganic growth for a while, and obviously a key deal. I think it's interesting time for the industry. BetR have got a really stated aim. Matt Trick came out yesterday and elsewhere in the press, and who is one of the guys behind BetR, and said those 100-to-1 promos aren't necessarily a thing of the past. They're keen on acquisition, so we might be able to see that. I think, Tim, from your perspective, what's the benefit of having another strong, ambitious player in the Australian market? How is that going to shape things, do you think, going forward?
Well, it's an interesting question, Bren. I think we talk about promos and 100-to-1, prices about favourites and certain different things. As we've talked about a lot, I think advertising and what those gambling restrictions will sort of shape a lot of that. But competition is good for everyone. It's just whether, losing Top Sport, and they've changed their business model, but Tristan and Lloyd were very much trying to take on all punters. And as you referenced in your article, where they're turnover has plummeted from more than $1 billion to sort of 300 odd million, I think it is, and that is purely because of the costs of running the business, the taxes and everything. Ideally we'd have a bookmaker who's, want a better term again, is, bookmaking and trying to lay every horse and take on and have prices with opinions put into them. But Tristan's, they've been going sort of 25 years plus that, they've put in a lot of work, they've built a valuable business and they've decided to still out, and you can't blame them for that. They've, so it's just going to be interesting whether there's another one of those smaller players that try to take on some of the top sport business model or older business model, whether that can be brought back through, PRAs probably have to look at that, and regulators that, you want all comers playing in the industry.
Yeah, the challenge with you've got turnover tax-based models is that you've got a disincentive for people to grow beyond a certain point. So you have two classes of bookies: those who are happy to go beyond the thresholds and sort of play and try to swim the big fish, and those who are sort of staying underneath for a variety of tactics. And as you mentioned, Tristan Merlihan spoke to Warwick Barr from Australia last year about sort of eschewing turnover on the basis of margin, and actually that strategy was probably 2 or 3 years ahead of the times, because now we've got Bet talking about that to a certain extent, and certainly PointsBet talking about the fact that the old model of sort of continuing to grow turnover is not necessarily of the benefit to the company. The challenge that racing's got is, how does it continue to grow turnover, or how does it continue to ensure? Because the challenge is, if we move to a margin-based model, right, which we are moving to a margin-based model where turnover is nowhere, is declining because the incentive for bookmakers to continue to build turnover is not there because of taxation and various other reasons, that becomes about margin. And, in any other form, if you want to make it really like a really simple form, margin means the amount of money you eke out of each customer, which means fundamentally the customer is worse off. So the challenge for racing around that is, if you're going to have people that aren't going to be betting much in and aren't going to be putting out money, it makes it a lot more difficult. And you can tweak your model to say, we're never going to charge based on profit or whatever else. And I know there's hybrid models, and the way things work out, it's quite a complex system. But for me, the challenge is if that's your model, the people who are worse off will be the punters. And after a while, they'll just get sick of it and they'll find another way to spend their money. And from a racing perspective in particular, in a very competitive market, it's a bit of a concern.
There's still people out there. I was speaking to someone this week who did have a small corporate bookmaker since sold it. He said he's had multiple calls in the last couple of weeks about people wanting him to reinvest in the industry or take shares in little, very small corporate startups to try and, I guess, stay under the thresholds. And that's one business model, is having multiple brands under, trying to beat the thresholds. And interesting. He doesn't see it that way at the moment, but it's interesting that there's still people out there and calling and seeking investment to continue to play in the game.
Yeah, it is an interesting game. As we've got over 100 bookmakers in Australia, I would think we kind of all expected that would be rationalised at some point, but the barrier to entry is not so big. The challenge is the barrier to growth. And it's once they sort of hit that 12 to 18 month mark where they sort of, start to plateau in terms of their growth. What do they do? How do they grow? And that's probably the challenge. And I think, what Australia does want is a diverse bookmaker scene. It does want, the success of racing in Australia, due on the fact that there are, 150 bookmakers on the rails at, Flemish on a Randwick on a Saturday, and that's not going to go back to that model, but what we need that is in a virtual space, that people are willing to take on the market and not just effectively market and then take the margin. Actually go back to bookmaking would be great, but, we know that's probably unlikely, Tim, but I guess that's just, I think we have an opportunity lots for racing to differentiate yourself, that it's not just about setting prices and hoping people lose money. It's actually about, having an opinion. All right, thanks for joining us on Straight Talk. Great to catch up with you again. Thank you very much to Sebastian Hutch for his time again. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you listen to us, whether that be Podbean, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever else. We'll be back again next week. We'll have a couple of special podcasts throughout the Inglis Classic Sale, which we mentioned before, which is coming up. And we'll look forward to talking to you then.